Thank you, Sue, but also to thank you for anybody else who's joining us this morning. I really do consider it an honour that you've decided to spend about 45 minutes to an hour with us discussing the issue of artificial intelligence with a specific focus on the experience of the pandemic. In terms of what I want to go through with you this morning, I'm going to give you a brief outline. You might be asking yourself, having seen the previous slide, well, that's quite an unusual range of subjects that Laura is interested in. Where is the connection between business ethics, public sector management, leadership and AI? Well, actually, it was out of those topics that I developed the interest in artificial intelligence. In the context of ethics, artificial intelligence is one of the main areas where new concerns regarding ethics are arising. Some of them are very difficult and will not be easy to resolve, and I'm going to tell you more about some of those shortly. And then in regard to the public sector, actually, if you trace the history of artificial intelligence, a lot of the early interest came from the public sector. A lot of the funding was provided by public sector entities in the likes of the US, the UK, Japan and China. And also the public sector is increasingly both a funder of artificial intelligence initiatives today, but also a regulator of artificial intelligence. They also use artificial intelligence increasingly in the services that they provide. So a surprising overlap between those different topics. So what am I going to do with you today? Well, I'm going to start by having a little bit of a discussion around the nature of artificial intelligence. So I'm not too sure what people's levels of knowledge or interest in relation to this topic are, so I thought it'd be useful to start at the beginning. I'm going to give you a little bit of a brief and partial history of artificial intelligence in terms of the development of the discipline, the current state of the art, so I'm going to give you some examples of how AI is being utilised today. We're going to pause briefly and think about some of those ethics and accountability issues in artificial intelligence because I think they're very interesting. And then finally, we're going to look at those applications of AI, predominantly around detecting, diagnosing, treating and understanding the novel coronavirus. We're going to ask the question, can we put our trust in artificial intelligence in terms of making a meaningful impact in addressing COVID-19? So let's get started. So what I want to do first is ask, what is artificial intelligence? So let's take a step backwards. So the authors Russell and Norvig note that we call ourselves Homo sapiens, in other words, man the wise, because our intelligence is so important to us. It's a huge part of our identity as a species. It's what's allowed us to climb to the top of the food chain. There are plenty of other animals that are bigger, stronger or tougher than us. We don't particularly have sharp teeth or claws. Our physical size is much smaller than many other predators, but it's our superior intellect that has allowed us to dominate. So the question that then arises in particular in relation to artificial intelligence is, what happens if something smarter comes along and challenges our position? And I think that's what underpins a lot of the fears in regards to artificial intelligence. So for thousands of years, we've tried to understand how we think, how this mere handful of matter within our skulls can perceive, predict and manipulate a world that is far bigger and more complicated than our brain is. So the field of artificial intelligence, it attempts to go a step further. It attempts to build intelligent entities. So AI currently encompasses a huge range of subfields, including general, learning and perception, and even specific aspects such as chess, proving mathematical theorems, even writing poetry and driving a car, which is some of the applications that you might already be familiar with. So in terms of the foundations of artificial intelligence, I just wanted to very briefly highlight the fact that although AI is a branch of computer science, it has been shaped by multiple different disciplines. So just looking across the screen there, you'll see in the first corner philosophy. So philosophy is attempting to ask the questions, where does knowledge come from and how does it lead to action? And then how can we apply this in the context of artificial intelligence? Next, we've got mathematics, which is probably one of the ones that seem quite obvious in terms of its contribution to AI. So it centers around things like what can be computed and what within our knowledge and understanding can we make into a computational form. How do we reason with uncertain information? As you're going to see later on, particularly within the context of the coronavirus, humans are much better at dealing with uncertainty at the moment compared to artificial intelligence. Economics, so I particularly selected this image of the person having to choose between two different pathways, because here economics asks the questions, how do we make decisions so as to maximize the payoff? How do we make optimal decisions? Neuroscience is another one that might spring to mind when you think about artificial intelligence, particularly in the context of neural networks. It asks, how do brains process information? Because often that's what we're trying to replicate in artificial intelligence. We're trying to replicate how humans process information. Moving down to the bottom part of the pictures on the screen, you'll see their psychology. So how psychology reflects on how humans and animals think and act, and then the artificial intelligence takes that a step further and questions how we can apply that to machines. Computer engineering is really focused on how we build efficient computers. A big problem that has affected artificial intelligence over the last several decades has been lack of computational power. So scientists working within the field have great aspirations, great ideas, but actually being able to manifest them has proved difficult, because even these days with supercomputers, quantum computing, still there can be a challenge in terms of processing power. Control theory and cybernetics, that looks at how artifacts operate under their own control, and it dates back as far as Greek times in terms of the first early artifacts that could exhibit some degree of self-control. And finally, linguistics. So how does language relate to thought and understanding? Because in addition to actually being able to construct sentences, for AI to be efficient, to be effective, it has to have an understanding of the subject matter and the context too. If you think back to some of those early experiences with Google Translate, for example, where you would put in your particular sentence and it would put out something that really didn't make a huge amount of sense, that was because there was a lack of understanding of the subject matter and the context. But as most of us now know, the likes of Google Translate has come on hugely in recent years. So it's about being mindful that all of these disciplines have made their own contribution in terms of the development of artificial intelligence. So the next slide I would say is probably the only one where I get a little bit sort of more technical, a bit more academic in nature, and it's about defining artificial intelligence. You know, what do we really mean whenever we discuss artificial intelligence? Turns out it's not an easy task, and at least in part it's because of all of the different disciplines that have contributed to the development of AI. It's a broad field and there has been multiple different approaches over the years. The way I like to distinguish between different definitions of artificial intelligence is taken from the work of Russell and Norvig, and they say it's about things such as thinking humanly. So how do humans think and how do we replicate that in AI? So the definition they offer here is the automation of activities that we associate with human thinking, activities such as decision making, problem solving and learning, and we can certainly see features of all of those within modern applications of AI. It can also be about acting humanly as well. How do humans actually behave? How do they conduct themselves in the world? So for example, the study of how to make computers do things, which at the moment people are better. A third way of thinking about it is thinking rationally. For example, the study of mental faculties through the use of computational models. But there's a bit of a distinction we can draw between thinking rationally and acting rationally. So another group suggests it centres around acting rationally. For example, and this is probably one of my favourite definitions from Nielsen, it keeps it short and sweet, AI is concerned with intelligent behaviour in artefacts. I think one of those things that underpins some of those definitions is that in reality, humans don't always act rationally. Sometimes we don't make the most rational decision in the circumstances, particularly if our feelings, if our emotions come into play. A few other sort of distinctions that you'll see within the literature you might already be familiar with is the difference between artificial narrow intelligence, artificial general intelligence, and then finally artificial super intelligence. So artificial narrow intelligence, it's AI with a narrow range of abilities. It's the type of technology that can, for example, play chess or the game Go. It can drive a car. The next step up, which we have yet to reach, is artificial general intelligence. So that's AI that is on par with human capabilities. Finally, artificial superintelligence is intelligence that is more capable than humans, and it tends to be the subject of science fiction, of scaremongering, but certainly given the fact that we haven't reached the stage of AGI yet, it's probably going to be quite some time before we take the leap towards artificial superintelligence. So very, very brief history of artificial intelligence, as I'd stated at the outset, just to give you an idea of how AI has developed over time. So when we can trace back some early ideas that are akin to artificial intelligence all the way back to the time of the likes of Aristotle, that he proposed some ideas that really do fit in alignment with what we now consider to be artificial intelligence, but they were very much ideas rather than tangible reality. In terms of the history of what we now understand to be AI, certainly an early advancement was the work of McCulloch and Pitts in the United States in 1943, and they proposed a model of artificial neurons. So neuron cells within the brain, they looked at how they communicated and connected with each other and proposed creating potentially an artificial version of this, which would allow us to engage in artificial intelligence. And they suggested that these potential networks could learn, which represented a real step forward in terms of the development of AI. And very famously, and certainly if you've seen the film The Imitation Game, Alan Turing in 1950 released his seminal paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, which again represented a leap forward in terms of thinking around artificial intelligence. 1956, though, was the year in which the term artificial intelligence was actually coined. So the term AI was first used in the Dartmouth Summer Research Project on Artificial Intelligence, which attracted not only researchers from around the United States, but much further afield to descend on Dartmouth in order to look at the state of play in terms of AI at that point in time and make plans for the future. In terms of the actual outcomes of the conference, what they produced during that period, they were quite modest, but what it did, it acted as a catalyst for further investigation into the field. So from the early 1950s into the late 1960s, there was a period of great expectations, great hope in terms of what could be achieved with artificial intelligence. AI began to flourish as computers became faster, they became cheaper, and very importantly, they became more accessible. More people could get access to computers, even if it was only on a timeshare basis. Some of the first programs were developed at IBM. They were a pioneer within the field. And the early progress enthused governments around the world, so the likes of the United States, the UK, decided to invest in AI research, particularly in the context of defence systems. 1970, Marvin Minsky, one of the best known figures in the field of artificial intelligence, made the claim that from 3 to 8 years, we will have a machine with the general intelligence of an average human being. Well, obviously we're sitting here today and that has yet to happen. So unfortunately for Marvin Minsky, his suggestion did not actually materialize. Progress was much more muted than he had hoped. One of the big problems was that lack of computational power. Early programs were simplistic and they didn't understand their subject matter, so they could produce accurate results, but they didn't necessarily understand why they had produced those results. It was a little bit hit and miss. Some of the projects were described as being quite toy in nature, quite small scale. The second problem was the intractability, the very difficult, hard nature of some of the problems that AI was attempting to solve, and scalability was another factor. So they could sometimes create quite small, at least as I said, these toy projects. Scaling them up into something meaningful was a really major challenge. So as a result, there was another fallow period within the sort of general AI ecosystem, but there was a period of revitalization from the early 80s onwards. So deep learning techniques were pioneered. So deep learning is a subset of machine learning that was networks capable of learning unsupervised from data that's unstructured or unlabeled. So that represented again another leap forward within the discipline, created more interest again on the part of governments. The UK, the USA and Japan again invested. That in turn attracted researchers into the field, and businesses began to develop an interest in AI. They began to ask the question, how could we apply this in a commercial context? An AI industry was born, but again, progress at times has been limited. We've had several AI winters where development has been stalled, but largely the 2010s constituted, if not an AI summer, certainly a very warm AI spring in which there were periods of significant advancement. Another point to highlight is this emergence of intelligent agents. So researchers attempted to solve the whole agent problem. In other words, the issue about creating an AI system that moves towards that general AI ideal where we can have, for example, voice recognition, speech, AI, machine vision, and so forth to create this whole intelligent agent. And one of the great leaps forward in terms of the development of that has been the internet. The internet has facilitated significant advancement in terms of the whole agent problem. And building a successful agent required all of those subfields to come together. We needed the likes of linguistics, and we needed control theory, we needed even an element of philosophy in order to take AI forward. But still, despite this progress, many of those early pioneers, people like Marvin Minsky, have been discontent with the progress that has been made within the discipline. Artificial general intelligence still appears a distant dream. Depending on the commentators, depending on the experts you speak to, people have different views in terms of how long it may take for that to come about. What we are living in now, though, is the era of very large data sets. So for decades, computer science predominantly focused on the algorithm, the set of instructions, the rules, the processes, but more recently there's been a growing attention towards the data itself. There's been quite a few studies that have indicated that the larger the sets of data we have, the better quality, the better performance of the AI system. But then it also raises the question, can we have too much data? And you think of the volume of data that we are producing on a minute-by-minute basis, can we almost reach a stage where we have too much data? I want to highlight for you the concept of AI agency. It's one of the central concepts within artificial intelligence. There's three main characteristics of agency to bear in mind. The first one is autonomy, and this is probably the most cited aspect of artificial intelligence. It's sometimes seen as a synonym for intelligence itself, as well as a characteristic of AI. It's also the thing that people tend to be most concerned about. It's the thing that tends to become the focus of science fiction films. So it's the capacity of an agent to act independently and make its own free choices. So in many respects, the essence of artificial intelligence. But other aspects of agency include adaptability, so the capability of learning from one's own experiences, sensations and interactions in order to be able to react flexibly to changes in the environment. So many of those narrow AI systems, for example, self-driving cars, can be fairly adaptable within a limited set of circumstances, but they certainly don't display general intelligence. Whenever I think about this point, I think about a tweet that was doing the rounds a year or two ago. It was the robotic, it was very sort of quite a limited form of artificial intelligence in this particular machine, but it was deployed in Washington DC. The security robot had a degree of autonomy, but clearly was struggling to adapt to its circumstances as it ended up plunging into a pool and had to be fished out. It also kind of reflects a bit of disappointment on behalf of some members of the public as well as researchers that, as they say in the tweet, we were almost flying cars, some really advanced AI, but instead what we're left with is this kind of device. And finally, interactivity, the capability of an agent to perceive and interact with other agents, be they human or artificial, understanding that they are agents themselves with their own goals and capabilities. So in terms of this point, I think in particular about the increasing sort of interest in automated care workers. So as you're probably aware, many countries around the world have issues with an aging population, and so there are multiple businesses that are looking into developing sort of intelligent agents that can perform many of the care functions for people that are currently undertaken by human beings. And autonomy is probably the area of the most significant debate. Some people believe that these machines will never attain full autonomy, and that they will always require humans to engage in at least some level of programming. Others disagree. One of the sort of hottest areas for debate is around weapons systems. So a number of countries, including the UK, the USA, China, are developing lethal autonomous weapons systems. And then the question arises as to whether those systems are eventually going to be allowed to make their own decisions regarding targeting, in terms of whether they effectively pull the trigger or drop the bomb on a target using their own autonomy. So some quite controversial issues there. What can AI do today? Well, I forgot to mention at the outset that all these slides are hyperlinked, so you can go on. I'll make sure they're made available to you. You can click on the icons and it'll take you into different stories about all of the different things that AI can do today. So most of you will probably be aware that AI can read, so it can even read and summarize particular texts for you, which is becoming increasingly useful in a business sense. It can write, so everything from short pieces, which the likes of the New York Times, the Washington Post, Reuters, for example, are currently using to generate articles. There's even been an AI novel, though from reports that I've read, it was pretty lengthy and very dull, so I wouldn't recommend that you read it. It can see, so machine vision is facilitating the ability of intelligent agents to actually see things, but that is, we must remember, built on the labour still of many human beings who sit for hours at a time coding those images so that eventually the AI can recognise it. It can listen and understand, so if you've ever used the likes of Siri, of Alexa and so forth, that is the use of the AI to be able to detect and understand what you're saying to it. Another interesting example, which you may have heard of, is the use of artificial intelligence to detect gunshots. So several US cities are employing AI-based technology to detect gunshots and then report those gunshots to law officers, who then go out and investigate. So multiple different uses there. It can smell, so that can be used either for the purposes of detecting disease, diabetes, cancer, so forth, but there's even attempts to make an AI-generated perfume, so some fun applications as well as serious ones. It can touch, and there's some technology that's being developed where AI can actually touch and feel, particularly applicable in the context of selecting produce. So they have trained AI that can pick ripe raspberries, I think roughly at a rate of 1 per 10 seconds for up to 20 hours a day. It can understand emotions, so it can look at people's faces and detect emotions. It can engage in debate, and also it can even create. So there's a lovely documentary, it's only I think around 15-20 minutes on YouTube, where they create a new Rembrandt picture using artificial intelligence. It's based on thousands of scans of work produced by Rembrandt, and it raises a whole question about whether that actually is the work of Rembrandt or is it the work of an artificial intelligence. But despite all of these advancements, which are many and substantial, there are concerns that we may be about to hit another AI winter as a result of slowing down of development in certain areas of the technology, including problems around computational power arising again. But AI is evolving. A really recent story, April of this year, was that researchers borrowed concepts from Darwinian evolution, including survival of the fittest, to build AI programs that improve each generation without human input. So, but like going back to the element of philosophy being brought in, so too is Darwinian evolution. So the program, again, you can click on these hyperlinks, replicated decades of AI research within days, and designers think has the potential to discover new approaches to AI. Building those neural networks can take substantial periods of time, and so what scientists have been doing is trying to speed up the process by automating some of the steps. But still, process relies on stitching together ready-made circuits that are designed by humans. But as a result of the progress made through AutoML0, we're going to see potentially AI starting to replicate itself, to evolve. It can develop AI programs without any human input. They're still quite rudimentary. It'll be a while before they can compete with the state of the art, but nonetheless, it represents a significant step forward. So some of the ethical issues, as I said to you, wanted to highlight in relation to AI before we move on to some of the current applications. It's those big questions like, how should AI behave in our society? Should we entrust it to care for elderly people, for sick people, or is that an affront to their human dignity? What do we do if jobs are in short supply? I mean, depending on the figures that you read, it could be anywhere up to 50% of jobs that are open to being made redundant through AI and automation. What do we do with those individuals if their jobs are lost? Should AI systems be allowed to kill? Obviously, I alluded to that in the previous slide through the development of lethal autonomous weapons. Should they be allowed to take that final step to pull the trigger or drop the bomb? Should we worry about super intelligence and the singularity? In other words, reaching the point where artificial intelligence either matches our own intelligence or potentially even exceeds it. And finally, the question of how we should treat artificial intelligence. This is a topic of really significant debate. A lot of it centres around that point where we either reach singularity, superintelligence, and AIs meet our own intelligence or exceed it, and therefore should we afford them some degree of robot rights, or do we treat them as if they are our slaves? It's a very controversial debate within the field. And then very briefly, just wanted to highlight the issue of accountability to you, because this is a really significant concern in the context of artificial intelligence. It's been suggested that there is an accountability gap, and if you've thought really anything around this issue, you'll see where that gap arises. So our legal systems in countries around the world are built on the assumption of human agents. It'll be the human driving the car, the human taking the decisions, but what happens if it's the artificial intelligence that takes those decisions? Creates an accountability gap according to Bartlett. So what if that AI makes a decision that harms someone or something? Where does the responsibility lie? Think of those self-driving cars. If an accident occurs, if someone is knocked down or another vehicle is damaged, who or what is to blame? Justice is another factor. Penalties and remedies in the legal system are for the most part designed to be levelled at human beings, not autonomous computer programs. And so as a result, many of the deterrents that keep humans arguably from committing crimes, like the threat of being locked up in prison, don't really hold any kind of fear or deterrent for artificial intelligences. We can't put them in jail. And finally, compensation. So in many cases, victims seek financial redress for the harm that has been inflicted on them. However, AIs can't be compelled to pay, so the victim will have to attempt to pursue a human or an organisation to get redress, but if there's not clear lines of accountability, that will pose problems. So as a result, alongside ethics, it's going to be one of the things that we really have to wrestle with within the discipline. So as promised, moving on to the specific example of the coronavirus. So AI has been deployed in the fight against COVID-19 in a number of different ways. So I've gone through the literature, I've gone through the media stories and picked out 4 in particular. Early detection, the diagnosis of COVID-19, the identification of treatment options, and rapid reviewing of the research literature. So the last one kind of cuts across multiple aspects. It cuts across detection, diagnosis, and then the identification of treatment options, but I put it as a separate one at the end, just because there's some interesting elements there. So let's consider each of those in turn. So first, early detection. I don't know whether you've heard about one of the quite high profile stories in relation to early detection that arose in regard to COVID-19. So one of the most widely reported stories about the novel coronavirus involved the Toronto startup BlueDot. So again, if you get a copy of the slides, you can click on the hyperlink and it'll take you into BlueDot's website. So it was founded by an accidental entrepreneur, a doctor called Cameron Khan. He'd been an epidemiologist and physician who treated patients during the SARS outbreak in Toronto in 2003. He was clearly really affected. If you read any of the interviews with him, if you watch him being interviewed, he was clearly deeply affected by what happened. There was some loss of life, but also people who were very ill as a result of SARS, and in addition, medical staff had to work round the clock in order to treat them. He then became determined to avoid becoming what he called flat-footed by another outbreak and wanted to anticipate rather than react. So what did he do? He created the company BlueDot. It employs a mixture of physicians and programmers, so in particular epidemiologists like himself. And they use artificial intelligence to attempt to identify future pandemics and other sort of spread of disease. They were among the first to identify the risk from COVID-19. So there's some debate as to who actually first identified it, but certainly if they weren't the first, then they were among the early discoverers. So their system scans through over 100,000 official and mass media sources in 65 languages in order to identify outbreaks in real time. Interestingly, they avoid social media and they don't engage with the likes of Twitter or Facebook because they think it's a bit too messy. It can throw sort of too much uncertainty into the picture, whereas if you click on that hyperlink on the slides, there's actually other similar businesses that do use social media in order to detect and track the spread of disease. They'll look, for example, at people reporting symptoms on Facebook. So if you go onto Facebook in the morning and say, oh, I've got a sore throat, I'm feeling under the weather, they may well be scraping that information and using it to inform their systems. So in terms of then what BlueDot did, on the 31st of December, the AI alerted one of the company's human employees to potential pneumonia-like outbreak in Hubei province in China. And the thing to really stress there is it's about this partnership between the artificial intelligence and the human, that the AI does not make a definitive decision, it passes it on to or notifies an epidemiologist who is the one that makes that, that further decision as to whether to notify some of the service users of BlueDot that a potential sort of pandemic is on the way. The employee, using human intelligence, recognised parallels to the 2002 SARS outbreak and pursued further modelling of the disease. That confirmed to BlueDot that there was something potentially happening in China, and that caused them to publish the first scientific paper on COVID-19, which accurately predicted the global spread. Interestingly, they also used global airline ticketing data in part of their modelling, and they were able to predict then how the disease would specifically migrate. So they used those airline ticketing data to predict that it would move from Wuhan to Bangkok, Seoul, Taipei, and ultimately Tokyo in the days following its initial appearance. So not only about just letting people know that there's a potential issue here, it's about being able to model the spread of disease too. Can states that we know that governments may not be relied upon to provide information in a timely fashion. It's a little bit critical about how governments around the world have handled it. So they say we can pick up news of possible outbreaks, little murmurs on forums or blogs of indicators of some kind of unusual events going on. Humans alone could not do that. They simply wouldn't be able to sift through that volume of information, but the AI can. Since being reported that an automated service at HealthMap in Boston Children's Hospital and a model run by Metabiota based in San Francisco also detected the first early signs of pandemic. So just acknowledging the fact that while BlueDot has received the most publicity, potentially that there were other AI systems that were picking up on this too. So through the likes of this technology, we become aware of the fact that a pandemic is emerging, but what about actually diagnosing cases of COVID-19? Well, this is where AI is also being employed. So one of the first projects was COVIDNet. So it's a convolutional neural network, a form of AI that is adept at recognizing images. As I said to you, it's one of the areas where AI has become quite well developed in recent years. It was developed by researchers at the University of Waterloo and an AI company called Darwin AI, who's quite well known within the field, based in Canada. And they trained their system to identify signs of COVID-19 in chest x-rays from patients with various lung conditions. So what they did was they got hold of x-rays for the likes of bacterial infections, non-COVID viral infections, other diseases, as well as examples of COVID-19. They uploaded that data and they trained the AI system to recognize some of the classic symptoms of COVID-19. Such as the ground glass opacity within some of those x-rays. They weren't the first to make claims that they could do this, but they were the first to fully release the technology, including the data sets that they had used to the public. So there were other researchers who were saying, you know, we can do this, but it was unproven, untested, whereas Wang and Wong decided we're going to make this publicly available, means that other researchers can test it too. The European Commission, so in the EU, they've announced that they're also investing in an automated AI tool that would allow the diagnosis of COVID-19 in less than a minute. Their approach is somewhat different to the one outlined on the previous slide. So they collate images from CT scans of patients that whenever they arrive in a hospital, the CT scan searches for lesions of that ground glass opacity that I'd mentioned, and also tissue density, both of which are characteristics of the pneumonia that can accompany COVID-19. If those lesions are found, if the AI discovers lesions within a particular scan, this sends an alert to a radiologist. They can then move that individual to the top of their pile in terms of reviewing suspicious cases. It means that they're not languishing maybe amongst sort of 20, 30, 100 other different scans. You can then pull that person out, make sure that they are quarantined and treated for COVID-19. In addition, the AI can also compare images of the individual patient's lungs over time and thereby track the progression, and we would hope the remission of the disease. Another project involving researchers at the health science company Zoe, in collaboration with researchers in Massachusetts and in London and in Nottingham, has developed an AI diagnostic tool that can predict if someone is likely to have COVID-19 based on their symptoms. So the doctor or nurse in question puts the symptoms into the system, and the AI will predict how likely that individual is to have COVID-19. So multiple ways of addressing the same problem. So the first being on the previous slide, by looking at X-rays. The European Commission was focused on CT scans, and then finally by inputting symptoms. So multiple different AI-powered approaches to diagnosing COVID-19. So you've gone through the stage of identifying the pandemic. You have been able to, hopefully through the use of AI, diagnose patients. What about your treatment options? Can artificial intelligence help us here? So given the speed at which the virus has spread around the world, a major focus has been placed on repurposing existing medications to treat COVID-19. Time is not on our side. We can't ideally start through that sort of laborious process of developing new drugs. So the first port of call is repurposing other drugs. In one article that I read, it described this as a desperate act, but it's something that really has to be done. Here, AI has the potential to play a really significant role. So one of several relevant projects, again you can click on the slide, it'll take you in, is being undertaken by Benevolent AI in conjunction with Justin Stebbing, a researcher at Imperial College Medical School. And the project moved really quickly, which is crucial in a pandemic, and that's largely due to the fact that it's powered by AI. So it involved two stages. Firstly, using machine learning to identify 2 human protein targets to focus on, and second, using another algorithm to then find existing drugs that could hit those protein targets. They completed that in a matter of days. It would have perhaps taken years for a human to be able to sift through that amount of literature, if ever, to be honest. So they identified a clear and worthy option of further study, baricitinib, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's still really early days. If you think about the fact that it's really only been a matter of months since the pandemic first arose, but already several trials have been conducted which indicate that this drug can be effective in the treatment of COVID-19. It's particularly pertinent because, as you may be aware, you may have read that it was announced I think it was on the 30th of June, that the US has purchased most of the world stocks of remdesivir, which is one of only 2 approved drugs for the treatment of COVID-19. For the next 3 months, there will be virtually none available for the rest of the world. As a result, it has become imperative to find other treatment options. As a result, baricitinib is becoming even more important. According to Justin Sebing, AI makes higher order correlations that a human wouldn't be capable of making, even with all the time in the world. It links data sets that a human wouldn't be able to link, and that is its major advantage. But it's by no means the only project, the one that is going on between Benevolent and Imperial College. Others are being undertaken at Rutgers University in conjunction with Brookhaven National Laboratory and also at Northeastern Laboratory. And again, you can click on those hyperlinks if you'd like to learn more about them. But, and certainly when you read into this, researchers regularly are frustrated by the lack of computing power, even given the proliferation of cloud and supercomputers. You know that in one particular study, they wanted to look at over 1 billion molecules and see how those were impacted upon COVID-19. But they said that even with the access to the computers that they had, it would still take quite a long time for those particular models to run. So still an issue that faces the AI industry. Finally, rapid reviewing of the literature. So the fourth way in which AI is making a contribution in terms of tackling coronavirus, though as I said, it cuts across those other three options. On the 16th of March, whenever the pandemic was starting to gather pace, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy issued a call to action for the AI community to help tackle the coronavirus crisis. It did raise a smile, I think, for me and many other people whenever this announcement came, because there was a lot of complaints made, or a lot of derision within the AI community as to how the White House had approached artificial intelligence since Donald Trump came into office. So under the Obama administration, work had been done in regards to advancing AI within the United States. Donald Trump took up the mantle of president and actually closed down a lot of those programs for a period of years. And it's only really since 2018, 2019 that we started to see greater support for artificial intelligence coming from the White House, and part of that, I think, is because such significant advancements were happening in the likes of China that it woke the White House up to the fact that they were potentially going to be left behind if they didn't do something. But moving forward to March 2020, having now realised the importance of artificial intelligence, they issued this call to the AI community. And one of the first steps was the development of the Covid-19 Open Research Dataset, or COVID-19 as it's known. And what COVID-19 does is bring together all of the academic publications, the research on COVID-19, which are increasing at an exponential rate, as you'll see in the next slide. Really importantly, though, the files are formatted in such a way that they are easier to use. So much of the data that we have had access to in the past has not been in a machine readable format, and that has either limited its use, or it has resulted in it becoming a much more time and resource intensive process. All of the files held on COVID-19 can be parsed by algorithms. And in order to focus research efforts, the White House compiled a list of questions to answer, including what is known about adaptations or mutations of the virus. And a weekly prize, because it's important to have sort of an incentive, is a prize of £1,000 is awarded to the team that has the best answers in a given week. That decision is actually made by medical students, so medical students volunteer to sift through those answers that are produced by the AI to check that they make sense, and then decide upon which are the most useful. Competitors typically use one of two different methods: kind of old school information retrieval, which requires very explicit rules that look for keywords and analyze the text around them, or those deep neural networks, which is a type of machine learning trained on those large data sets. But both are in operation and producing results. Another site, the Covid-19 Primer, supplements the academic literature with sources such as news stories and social media. It is more aimed towards so the well-educated citizen or the interested citizen rather than academic researchers. And so you can absolutely click on that link if you're interested in this topic, learn a little bit more about what is happening. So as I mentioned, the literature on COVID-19 has grown exponentially, and the diagram on the slide from Nature shows just how rapidly that growth has occurred. In the grey is total literature on COVID-19, orange is peer review, yellow is preprints. So the National Institutes for Health based in the United States, their portfolio as of June 2020 was over 28,000 articles, but to be honest, that only represents a fraction of what has been published, and it's more than any researcher or clinician could reasonably read, particularly given the pace at which things are moving. And this is where AI can provide a partial solution, emphasis on the partial here. So thanks to those advances in natural language processing, AI can sift through the research and find studies most relevant to the user, and in some cases extract specific findings. So depending on the particular field that the user is in, so for example, whether they are sort of accident and emergency doctors, whether they are epidemiologists, oncologists, or pediatricians, they can select what particular information they want to have returned to them. And it's very much tailored and can even extract specific findings. And also those tools can be applied to other fields. So what we're learning through the use of AI can also be applied much more broadly. But they're still in the development stage and their value is largely unproven. As I said, it's really early days. They can't be used to make clinical or research decisions, but they can certainly provide clinicians with access to research that they may not have otherwise been able to retrieve, especially when they're under time pressure, and that informs their decision-making process. But at the end of the day, it needs to be the human, it needs to be the individual doctor or nurse making those clinical decisions. A few final points of reflection. So will AI make a meaningful difference in terms of the pandemic? It's still a really difficult question to provide a definitive answer for. All of the projects that we have highlighted are still in their early stages, and we've yet to see whether they're going to bear fruit, but certainly some of the results so far are quite promising. But there's concerns that the hype outstrips the reality, particularly within the popular media. There's often a lot of overhype about artificial intelligence, and the reality is often much more muted, and there's a fear that it could lead to poor investment decisions, either in the part of governments or businesses. They might put money into something that doesn't actually produce meaningful results. So it's been contended that AI will help with the next pandemic. So you can click again on that link and read an article that discusses how it may not help greatly with the current pandemic, although actually there's suggestions that it might produce some meaningful results, but certainly it's fairly guaranteed that maybe not within our lifetime, but certainly there will be another pandemic. And what we've learned in regard to the use of AI during this pandemic can be translated forward into the next pandemic. But for that to happen, we're going to need access to more data, and strategies for achieving that can be controversial. It would require citizens to be prepared to release more of their own data, particularly around health trends and so forth. And it also raises then concerns about how that data is collected, collated and held, because as everybody knows, there's been a fair few incidences of severe and damaging data breaches over time. So if we hand over our data for potentially the advancement of artificial intelligence in addressing pandemics, we need to be confident that that data is being held in an appropriate manner. And then just the last few points. So the World Economic Forum argued that it's not the technology itself that could make a difference, but rather the knowledge and creativity of the people who use it. In some respects, AI is still quite a blunt instrument. It can sift through all of those academic papers, for example, but it can't make and shouldn't be making clinical decisions. As a result, those have to fall to humans, and that's where our own intelligence comes into play. The main advantages of AI over humans at present is speed and pattern detection, patterns that humans may not be able to identify, particularly between different disciplines. But humans are much better at dealing with novelty and nuance than artificial intelligence. So as a result, collaboration is absolutely key. Really interesting, our weird behavior during the pandemic is messing with AI models. So AI models, are based on data from the past, and they extrapolate from what has happened in the past, but all sorts of strange things are happening in those data sets now. I've used that image of the Mona Lisa, you're carrying the toilet paper and the hand sanitizer. Well, we've been doing some very odd things in terms of the pandemic. So staying at home, not traveling on public transport. Think about the amount of aircraft that have been grounded. Our purchasing decisions have changed dramatically. So think about Amazon, a big user of artificial intelligence in terms of modeling customer demand. All of a sudden, demand rapidly shifted around mid-March time and hasn't sort of fully reverted to normal. So there's going to be some very odd data sets that humans will have to control for when it comes to using the AI. So while AI might play a modest role in addressing the coronavirus crisis, the pandemic actually might result in advances in AI. So while AI may make a contribution in terms of dealing with COVID-19, actually what we're probably going to see happen as well is COVID-19 resulting in a push forward of some advances in AI. And so one final slide where is, if I haven't put you off, if you have any interest in this topic, there are numerous really great books that you could pick up, ranging from Nick Bostrom's book, which is sort of quite critical of artificial intelligence, raises a number of concerns, right through to ones about the business implications of artificial intelligence. And then finally, on the other side of the screen, Susanna Zuboff's work on surveillance capitalism, which raises some concerning questions about how our data is being harvested and potentially used. So thank you so much. I really do hope you got some value out of that, and if there's any questions that I can answer, I'd be happy to do it now, or feel free to drop me an email. I'm always happy to talk about artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Oh, Laura, thank you so much. That was a really fast, comprehensive overview of artificial intelligence, and taking us from the history through to the daily applications and some of the more slightly disturbing aspects of AI, and in particular concerns with weapons and how they might be used in the future, and obviously bringing up to the current pandemic crisis that we're currently facing and how it might then shape responses to health crises and etc. going forward. Just in terms of questions, we have a question around superintelligence and general AI.
That's a great question, Josh. Yeah, it is that fear, and I think it's been the subject of many science fiction films, but it's also a fear, very much a real world fear. The likes of Elon Musk has expressed concern around it. It's literally reaching kind of that point where the AGI becomes, and we lose control of it. It gathers pace, and it's no longer in our hands anymore. And I think that is very much a deep-seated fear that some researchers hold. And so, as Josh points out there, is there a feel-safe around building general AI, building AI systems? And so, yes, there is a lot of discussion around potentially a feel-safe or kill switch built within systems to prevent that happening. But that there is always a fear that if then the superintelligence exceeds us so much, then it could turn off its own kill switch. It could remove the feel-safe device. At the minute, it's still in the realms of science fiction, but I think it's really important to think about these issues. It's better to think about them now than to be thinking about them at a time where it's almost too late. And it's the same with the ethics questions around it. Some of these have not materialized yet. We haven't reached the stage where robots are on par with humans, but better to think about it now than to do it and then to be worrying about it in the future. So Robert, do you think that community-based computational health projects such as Learning at Home, which enables researchers to analyze interactions of proteins and receptors, may become useful in the future for computational power and AI? So I don't know a huge amount about this particular project, but I know of similar ideas happening within other areas where they're bringing in the community, and I think it's fantastic. And I wish I could remember the name. If I remember, I'll add it into the slides, but there's another similar project happening within another discipline where they put out a call to action for people to get involved, because, and it's something that I talk about with students, is that so much of the advancements in terms of AI are built upon human labour. So you may have seen the videos of the likes of the, so they're called farms in China, in other countries, where humans are sitting day in, day out, so coding pictures, coding text, and looking at human faces to code emotions. And that wouldn't be possible without human interaction. And there's a lovely study, or a lovely report, that was written a few years ago and about the Mechanical Turk. So I don't know whether you're familiar with the Mechanical Turk, but it was, I think it's dating back at least a few hundred years, so it looked like magic. If you or I had gone to see it, we would see so the magician who was sitting at a table and looked as if they were performing acts of magic, but actually there was a human in the box below them who was controlling what was happening. And in some ways AI is still quite similar, that there's a lot of humans behind the scenes, and the likes of Amazon don't want us to be aware of that, and they work quite hard in order to keep that side of the business discreet. They'd rather have that magic, the AI-powered magic, rather than the reality. So thank you, Robert. I'm going to go and look into that project now, and if I can remember the name of the other similar intervention, I will certainly get that added into the slides for you. But I think, you know, the more people we can get involved generally, the better with this. I'm not sure if there's any other questions that I can answer. I hope I've managed to finish within time, which
you have indeed, Laura.
If anybody knows me, is I can sometimes get a little bit carried away, but Laura, I really appreciate those questions. I think it's such an interesting topic, and I think that it's an area where we're going to see huge developments in the next number of years. But to touch upon what the likes of Josh said there, we need to be mindful about the social and ethical implications of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thanks again, Laura. Just in terms of the assets, we will add the video, as I mentioned, to our website a little bit later on today. We can, of course, Laura, you're posting a blog in the next few days, so we can append the slides to that and the link. And also, as Laura says, keep in touch with us. You can connect with us on Twitter, LinkedIn, do message us directly, and we can drop you an email with the slides and the video directly. So thank you very much for attending. Lovely to have you today, and do look out for our further webinars. Check out the events page on our website, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.